Here we are. We are live. Welcome everyone to today's DX Cafe event, the future of digital experiences. And happy Friday. Hope you can enjoy this with that that on the docket. The weekend coming. I'm Matthew McQueenie from Conabos. If you have any thoughts or questions as we move along in this discussion, please type them in the chat, whether you're in LinkedIn or if you happen to be watching this on YouTube live. We will surface those comments and questions right into the stream here as we go, and we can also answer them towards the end. But let's really get into this. Joining us today is Andrew Kumar, VP of Customer Solutions at Uniform. Andrew, welcome.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and you and I have talked about this particular topic on a few occasions. So I feel it's something we're both very passionate about, and yeah, we'll have a lot of fun. So looking forward to it.
Perfect. So, Andrew, I know who you are. As you said, we've done a handful of things together. But if you could introduce yourself to the audience, your background, and what led you up to what's been a pretty recent move to Uniform, a couple of months, if I recall.
Yeah. I'm in week 12, so just about to round out the first quarter, which is fun. But yeah, I spent a lot of time, I guess, meandering in my career, and from a design degree to working in web development shops and agencies, and working on e-commerce and Magento projects, Sitecore and Sitefinity projects, and eventually starting my own agency, doing that for a couple of years. So with a couple of co-founders, going back to agency, going to client side. So I spent some time in the customer shoes, and that was a pretty transformative time and part of my career, because I work for a giant enterprise that I reference all the time, and was really tasked with, and I don't know, this is going back almost 7 years, but really tasked with going full steam ahead with what's now deemed as headless or mock or composable. And back then we didn't use those terms, or those terms didn't exist, but that was where we were going 7 years ago. And that kind of changed my career trajectory quite a bit. Then I spent some time back in consulting, back in the agency world. And then I joined Contentful. I joined the dark side of the vendors, which is also interesting and also fun, right? It just what I found was, when I'm client side and I'm working with digital factories and digital teams, I can have an impact on 30 or 40 different engineering teams in an organization. When I'm consultant side, it's just whatever engagements and projects I have at the time. So lesser of an impact. Moving to an org vendor side like Contentful, it's like I have access to 400 plus engineering teams across our customer base that all want to learn. So that was really good, really impactful. And then I joined Uniform, and I had a tour of duty at other places in between, and all kind of connect to this composable, mock, headless ecosystem and landscape that's formulating. So I've worn many hats, is how I would describe it. Customer, consultant, vendor.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we are going to explore the DX architectures, and we're going to level set all of the terms we all hear, just to really hit home, because education is so big here. But before we do that, why don't you just remind us what Uniform does in particular in this mix?
Yeah. So Uniform is, I'm, in the 12 weeks that I've been at Uniform has changed. it's a rapidly evolving product set. But it very much is like this visual workspace for a digital team. So if you think about how a digital marketing team, how a digital engineering team, how everyone kind of comes together to build experiences for customers, Uniform is a really great tool to bring those teams and provide that visual workspace. So if you're thinking of when we think of who builds a website, who builds an app, oftentimes the engineers and developers are highlighted. But there's many other people who make meaningful contributions to a digital experience, to a website, to an app. Sometimes they're product marketing or merchandising. Sometimes they're growth and engagement teams doing conversion rate optimization activities. So there's this mix of roles that contribute meaningfully, and Uniform is really built around those types of audiences. So there's development tooling to help with integrations and orchestration. There's this visual canvas to help marketing and content ops teams create websites, apps. We did this POC and we're exploring with a customer of how to use Canvas, but there's actually no visual display. So it's a visual assembly, but it's feeding into an Amazon Alexa chatbot. So this whole notion of like, yeah, it can be a website, and often it starts with a website, but the notion of a composition can be a page, a screen, something in kiosks, something in digital display, or no screen at all, just into a chatbot. So it is pretty interesting seeing how our customers, what POCs they're pulling off, and what they're pushing in the market, and therefore what they're pushing Uniform to support, which is really nice and really rewarding, and makes us very powerful utility for those customers. And then finally, I talk about growth and engagement teams. So most mature digital organizations have someone focused on conversion rate in those conversion rate programs. And so we have tooling to really amplify those efforts and bring that notion of, okay, you have technology, you have design, you have data, and you have content, and you can coalesce everything in a really nice platform with Uniform. Now, with that being said, we're very much attached to this composable space because we need to source content from a CMS. It could be headless. It might not be headless. It kind of doesn't matter. We need to source data from something, analytics tooling, streaming, segment, whatever. Sometimes we plug in with Algolia and search indexes so you can personalize someone's search. And sometimes digital asset managers, and sometimes it's commerce systems. So you start to think about all the different tools in an enterprise stack and how it all comes together to build rewarding, highly converting experiences. And that's ultimately what Uniform is doing, is bridging the gap across multiple systems. And we have this ethos of around like no glue code. We have a glue code monster. And I think it's really important because there is, when you start to unpack composable, if you are not smart about it, you could end up writing a tremendous amount of glue code and integration code, and that can be problematic. And then the next app or project or website, you got to do it again and again and again. And so that is very much a problem space where we see our solution fitting in really well with those engineering teams, so that they don't have to recreate the wheel every time. They have a stable set of connections and don't have to worry about all of that middleware code being kind of custom and bespoke.
Beautiful. So we're going to go into a handful of terms to start the exploring DX architectures. And we're going to start with the monolithic. And I'd like you just to explain what this is, but also one other piece I liked when you were talking about Uniform, the product, as well as products that might be in the space that you've worked with in the past. It's this idea of, in a monolithic system, there might be at most a dozen users who can log into that. And a lot of these systems allow 6 times that, many more times that. So if you could weed that in, but also just give us the explanation on monolithic.
So I personally am starting to shy away from the term monolithic. And the reason I'm shying away from that is the historical monolithic platforms are decomposing themselves, right? There's so much trend and trajectory that they are seeing the light of composable. So they're taking their giant, so monolith is, all your software embedded into one application. And so all of your features, all your functions all get bundled together. And the challenge with the traditional monolithic systems is enterprises are complex. So I've been kind of humming and hawing about how do we really navigate this, because enterprises become complex because they're meeting customer needs. Right? Customers have a need, they build a package and offering a pricing, they build something, and the customer goes and buys it, and enterprise is profitable. And then they do it again and again and again, and after a couple hundred times, you have this very complex business. And then trying to fit a monolith inside that complex business doesn't quite work. So the enterprise then goes, okay, we either change the way we work and our processes to fit what the monolith is doing, or we spend a lot of money and time and effort, and it's expensive and slow, but we make the monolith wrap around the business. And so that doesn't work. And that's where headless and mock and composable really caught ground, is on that second part, is making the monolith work for the enterprise. Now the monoliths have also caught that, right? And so they're decomposing themselves to be more modular, and that way it can support the complexities of that business. And I always find myself in this scenario where someone will say, "Oh, our business is not that complex," and then you start to untug the thread. And we talked about this earlier, of how some agencies start with strategy and really understand the business before they even talk about technology, and then you understand, hey, this business is actually really quite complex. And now that we've mapped the complexity, we can make the technology mold around the business, not the business mold around the tech. That, I think, is a very valuable approach. And now the monolithic vendors are starting to decompose and tackle that approach. So I'm using the term all-in-one now. It's so you have these sort of one application, it might be 2 or 3 or 4, right, as they decompose themselves, but it's still kind of an all-in-one solution. They play very nicely within their modules, but don't tend to play very nicely outside of their modules. It reminds me of, like, if you think about like certain tool sets, and you have the battery pack that only fits the one brand, right? And it's like, I have a drill from another brand. It's like, it's basically unusable because it's not part of that system. It's not part of that all-in-one ecosystem. And so that's where I foresee what we historically are calling monoliths. They're going to look more like these all-in-one ecosystems. Now, there are pros and cons, but because the major con I find is when one vendor or one tool tries to do many things, they are often not the best in any singular thing. So a monolith won't have the best CMS. It might have the second or third or fourth best CMS. It won't have the best personalization. Won't have the best search. It won't have the best commerce. It won't have the best DAM. They'll have an offering, but it won't be the best. And it may not be the exact need of what an organization needs. So those are kind of the pros and cons, because they weren't really designed to be composable. So they're working against time. But there are also strengths with going, like, if you just want to, if an out of the box solution fits, then you can get to market immediately. You only have one vendor contract and procurement cycle to worry about. So there is definitely some aspirations and desires, and I think I used to have this like spectrum of like how straightforward your business is and how complex your business is. And like, as you start to go into the more complex custom, that's where the monolith starts to become an impediment. And that is just my lesson learned.
Yeah, and I think the all-in-one, sometimes you'll hear unified DXP now. And I think, to your point there still is potentially a place for it. It's just probably based on a digital maturity, correct?
I think digital maturity is usually a lagging indicator, right? Like the business complexity, I think, is where I think we need to focus. If the business itself is complex, we need to really think about changing the digital maturity to match the needs of the business, not adopting technology based on who you have on, right? And that generally, when I've seen organizations approach it that way, like, we have a business that's this complex with this type of competitive landscape, we need digital to adhere to support these goals and objectives, then you can put in the programs and initiatives to improve your digital maturity, and then your tech and tools kind of fit that picture, not the other way around.
Got it. And oftentimes, as we move into headless, oftentimes organizations were potentially using best of breed solutions in addition to the monolithic system. You know, whether it's email, obviously the greatest example is Google Analytics in a way, right? Like that kind of won out, but they were using those. And I think that might have started to force an unbundling a bit, because if you find yourself happy with some of those alternate solutions and then you see yourself paying for the whole thing, you almost, get into the cord cut thing.
Yeah, I think best of breed is also something I'm shying away from, and kind of focusing on best of need, because sometimes you there could be tools or parts or modules of those all-in-one systems that is good, that could be the best, and in which case if you rip that out and go full on composable headless, you might deteriorate your digital teams toolkit and then deteriorate your end customer um, expectations. So this hybrid notion of some all in one, some headless, I think is still, I think that's gonna be kind of the middle ground where most enterprises end up.
Perfect. So let's actually, we've said the word headless a bunch. How do we define this term, and what are some of the strengths, weaknesses,
Well,
suitability for business needs?
I love the background image on the slide. I just noticed that. It's like I don't have it. So generally, headless is kind of a hot keyword. Still has quite a bit of search intent and search volume. I do monitor it, and arguably more search intent than every other keyword in our space right now.
Hmm.
So, and it's interesting, right? And with headless, you don't have an attachment. So in the all-in-one systems, you have this attachment where the software and the system is also tied to how it's presented to the customer. So in all-in-one, CMS builds web pages and websites. And then if you try to build a mobile app with the all-in-one, you have to untether. You have effort to actually, you have a lot of effort to create flexibility. If you try to put that content into an email channel or a digital display or a VR, like an Apple VR headset, like it's a lot of work. It's feasible, but it's a lot of work. Headless does the opposite. It doesn't actually know where the content is going. It's blind. It's not only headless, it's blind. You have your content, someone's consuming from your API. You don't actually know where that content is going to end up in front of the customer. It could be a website, could be an app. So the benefit there is you have tremendous amount of flexibility. It's almost the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Where you're tethered to a view. Now you're completely untethered to a view, but you can reuse that content across a variety of different touch points and channels. So if you have that mobile app, the in-store kiosk, the digital display, you can feed all of those different systems with a headless platform. And that has presented another set of challenges. And I've spent a lot of time in my last 6 or 7 years building tools to help represent the preview, represent the view, represent what those consuming applications are. And it really depends on the industry, right? Like when I work on a telco and you have 60, 70, 80% of your visitors viewing your brand on a mobile device that you put in their hands, headless makes a lot of sense, right? It's very mobile driven customer engagement or chatbot driven customer engagement. But if there's still a lot of teams and a lot of organizations that will use headless to start off with a website, and that's fine. And then go one website, two website, three website, many websites. And then they start to be able to get some of those advantages of headless, even if it's only one channel, but many different websites. But it's a different paradigm, right? What comes out of the box is pretty lean.
Yeah. And do you find when you look at that search intent, that's interesting to me. So that is one of the most searched terms in this kind of set of terms right now.
Yeah, I've been looking at Google Trends or Ahrefs and looking at what's being searched. I would say headless, it's kind of in that early majority mode, but it's if we consider headless compared to composable, headless compared to mock, it's almost like a 400x of how much more search volume there is for headless.
Wow. And do you find, if you look in the intent at the sentiment, that customers are seeing headless as a flexibility, a positive term, or do you see anything out there where they think headless is bad? Because obviously, I always think of the chicken with their head cut off, that saying, right? And that there's no order, there's no sense of it all. Like, do you find that there's a negative intent to this word at all?
I think from a marketing perspective, right, it does represent a bit of a negative intent that marketers find. Oh, I'm going to lose some capability. I'm going to lose some tooling. From a developer perspective, I think it's almost become normalized that the headless is the way to go. Now, I just last week I spent 2 days on site with a customer, and reuse. It was like the theme of all the meetings was reuse, and that's and this is a customer that's a pretty heavy duty user of headless, and that kept being the echo. And so I think there is this kind of synonymous ambition that headless enables reuse better than other options right now. So I think it depends on the organization. But yeah, the term is still pretty hot, and we'll see if it maintains its heat.
Well, we probably should have put the others first then if it was the biggest term. But my last thing on that, when you're talking to the marketers who might just automatically hear the word and go, well, that can't be a great thing. What are the pieces that you find bridge that to get them on side to feel good about headless in general?
Well, that's uniform, right? Like that is a value prop of uniform, is that you can have kind of the best tools and best developer experience with headless, but you're not leaving. So, and this is kind of a weird trend or observation where developer experience tooling has matured so fast, and developer experience has become a really big, really hot topic. The tooling for marketing and content ops has lagged behind. And this is why I'm really excited about Uniform, because Uniform kind of rebalances and says, hey, we have this great dev tooling. It's fantastic. CLIs, APIs, whatever you need. But there's also this visual canvas that brings marketers along for the ride. So now marketers, content ops also have great tooling that lives in harmoniously next to this developer experience. And I think that's the big opportunity, and the big miss in headless was it was built for developers, and the other digital team members were kind of left in the wings. And so if we're thinking about how to win marketers, content ops, and merchandisers, and growth and marketing and conversion rate teams into the headless world, this is and Uniform is not the only tool. Like, there are many tools in this space that are now solving this need, but that's the evolution of the market, is these complementary tools coming together to solve for the broader audience.
That's great. It's almost in some ways talking about that when IT made the decisions, and when we're talking about monolithic being or all in one, being that the business has to wrap around the solution. In some ways, marketing had to wrap around the IT decision in a way, right?
Yeah, yeah. And all of the kind of monolith all-in-one solutions have some sort of visual tooling for marketers, and it was enabling, and then in some way, shape, or form, it kind of swung. It swung, and if you're a marketer or a content ops person coming from one of the all-in-one solutions to a headless solution, your initial reaction is, "Huh? Like, I'm missing I'm missing my tools." Right. And yeah, now I feel like, but even the headless tools are starting to add back in capabilities that really support marketing and content ops user groups. So the irony is, I feel like a lot of the tools are starting to look the same.
Commoditization. So next up, Mock. Now, Uniform is a member of the Mock Alliance. Did Mock come before or after Mock Alliance? And explain Mock.
No, I think the Alliance coined the term.
Yeah.
Mock, and so it stands for microservices, API first, cloud, and headless. And a lot. So the Mock Alliance has a very high bar for standards and quality. So not every vendor in the space passes that bar. And so having that Mock Alliance, like, I'm proud at Uniform we have that Mock Alliance seal of approval, but it's also like a reassurance to prospective buyers that, hey, like, this Uniform platform has been audited, it meets technical standards, it's going to be good to support your previous investments, but then also your future investments. And I think it's really important, because there's a lot of vendors in our space that are quite loud and but then they don't pass Mock Alliance standards, and then there's complaints, hey, the Mock Alliance isn't very inclusive. It's like, well, maybe, but like, they set these standards for enterprise organizations for a reason, and they want to uphold the standards and move the industry forward. And it's a very difficult and admirable challenge that they are tackling. So yeah, and I think it is kind of an interesting point, but I do appreciate the effort, and I've seen some terms coming out around, yeah, like some challenges. The Mock Alliance is not inclusive enough, but it's it's that might be the point. It's like not everyone gets in if you don't pass the validations, and that if everyone is in, then the seal doesn't have any value.
Yeah, it's almost not so much inclusive, but exacting, right? It's trying to create a standard, and one of the positives potentially in a customer's mind of an all-in-one, like you said, is having one login and all of these capabilities there, one vendor. In my feeling, what Mock allows for is at least some semblance of connection between all of these solutions in this new paradigm, so that you as a customer can kind of feel it. I don't want to call it a monolith or something, right? But you have this ability to know that there's a stamp of approval in this new paradigm and give you some of that comfort, whether it was false comfort or not, that you might have had in an all-in-one or monolith.
So I'm glad you brought up the term monolith too, because there are some players and agencies and vendors in our space that will create a bunch of custom connectors from a bunch of these different services or vendors in the Mock Alliance, and that becomes its own product, and they productize it, and that effectively becomes a monolith. It's like you have a predetermined set of connectors. This is a standard process. It's not a bad thing. It is an accelerator, but it does start to you've pre-selected your modules, and it starts to look more like the all-in-one solution, and you could even rebrand it and relabel it that way. And but I think where it comes down to is this next term around composable or flexibility, right? If when you start to write a lot of glue code to stitch systems together, you're limited, right? You have only a certain amount of flexibility, and if you try to swap and change different modules, you're back to code and back to a lot of code, and that can be problematic. You're hitting some of those all-in-one challenges that you try to avoid, even with a collection of different vendors. I myself, as a customer, spent a lot of time building starter kits, and these starter kits were to accelerate the teams that I was working with, so that we had our pre-selected tools. But the moment we didn't want to swap a tool, it's like we have to change the starter kit, and then we have to change up to 600 applications that use a starter kit, because now we're swapping our tool set. So there's an effort, and there's a pretty clear lesson learned that monolith at scale is not good. It ties you to a bit of code complexity and code debt and tech debt that can be not insurmountable, but challenging to unwind in the future.
Interesting. So lastly, composable. So I would assume all Mock is composable, but not all composable is Mock.
So yeah. So I think composable is kind of it's the newest of the terms, but I also think the way it's being defined is really learning the lessons from the previous three terms. And so all-in-one solutions, formerly monolithic solutions, are becoming composable. They're decomposing themselves into modules, so you can recompose them in however you need to fit your business. Headless tools are generally composable by default, because they're kind of unique, like ring-fenced capabilities that can be plugged and played as necessary. And then Mock, so right, like Mock has headless built in to the term, but it pushes the needle, because like you can be, if you have APIs on top of any software, you can claim, hey, now we're headless. But the reality is, do you have clean, well-articulated, well-defined microservices that can be used to manage the entire infrastructure of your platform? So you can be headless, but you may not meet the microservices. You can be headless, but you may not be API first. And this is actually something I loved in my time at Contentful, is the API gets published the same time the feature gets published. So if I don't want to use Contentful's UI, I can build my own interface using the API, using the management API. And so this is one of those technical regulations that not all vendors pass, because they'll build a feature, the API won't be publicly accessible, and so you have to use the user interface that's provided. You can't make your own tooling on top. So and then cloud. So you can theoretically have a headless WordPress installation that's locally hosted, but it's not on a cloud. It's not self-serve. It doesn't auto update. So it doesn't really meet the regulations of that cloud definition. So if we think about something, I used to run a lot of Drupal websites, and every week I'd get an email with six like, hey, here's the next 6 security vulnerabilities you need to patch, and it would be a nightmare. And with the cloud part of Mock, I no longer have to worry about the security patches. The vendor takes care of that. That is their responsibility. I don't have to go patch a bunch of systems. So you can be headless Drupal, but you won't pass Mock, right? So this is where it's like it becomes, with each step, it becomes more advanced, but it also becomes more beneficial for the end buyer. And then composable is kind of that last step where it's kind of the last level up, where it's really focusing on the modularity and flexibility of the systems. And so if you are a complex business enterprise, being composable is very valuable, because your business, and COVID hits, your business changes. You're no longer a retail brick and mortar. You're now online. So your business needs to be composable, and your tech stack has to reflect the changes going on in your business. So I'm a big fan of the composable approach. Unfortunately, when we talked about the sentiment and the search, there's not a lot of search volume. There's not a lot of people looking for composable yet. It has been promoted quite heavily, and it may become the next hot keyword, and I hope it does. But if I just look at search volume and search intent, it's not quite there yet.
There's a little bit of a question that might be silly in my not as technical brain as yours, but when you talked about building starter kits in the past, or if they build starter kits now, is there a lot of coding involved in that, or is it a lot of like this low code, no code, built on solutions, or do people like still have to code a lot? And is that the problem with this glue code thing?
That is 100% the problem with the glue code. Like it is, yeah, lots of code, usually in back in the day we were using Next. Sorry, not Next. It didn't exist. Node, Express, and React, and we called it isomorphic. So it would be both client side and server side. Server side mainly for SEO purposes. Client side for any after the first hit, everything's kind of rendered on the client. Part of the rationale there too is back in the day, computers were slow, laptops were slow, mobile devices were slow. So you wanted to push all of that logic and experience and rendering on the server. Now and bandwidth was really expensive. Now we have cheap bandwidth, fast bandwidth, and a supercomputer in your pocket. So you have a balance. You can do some things on the server, some things on the client, and hence isomorphic. But that term doesn't really make any sense anymore, because Next.js and all these modern frameworks have effectively productized that starter kit, so you can start much faster. You don't have to recreate those wheels like I had to do 7 years ago. Well, I didn't, but my team did. It was all code. It was a lot of code, and the connections to all the different APIs were bundled in the code. The connection to the design system was bundled in the code, and there was the code, when you spun up the starter kit, it basically just said hello world, but all of the design system was set up, your connections to your APIs, your connections to your content source and DAM, it was all ready to go. And then from there, you could start building your features, your functions, your pages, whatever. But it was a lot of code. When we start looking at, and tools like Uniform productize that entire process. So you can minimize the amount of code you need in that starter kit, and push the heavy lifting to Uniform. And productizing that means the customers and the engineers, and they can get to building features and functions bespoke to their business needs much faster. If 80% of your code is minimized, it's no longer a problem. You can really reallocate your effort on the 20% that makes sense for your business,
and get to market much quicker. And we're going to get into understanding the approach, but basically the flip side of the answer you just gave to what I said, when somebody's really advanced in headless mock composable, is coding as we knew it like really diminished?
I don't know. It's I don't believe so. And there are more terms kind of coming up, like micro front ends, where we're doing more code, more bundling. It's still encouraging and increasing reuse. Now, I don't know if going fully no code is really feasible. There's just so much software, just so much demand from customers for software and experiences, and there's developers that are happy and willing to go, and agencies and SIs that are happy and willing to go do that work. When it starts to get into fully no code, there tends to be like quality variation, the quality changes. So I've seen customers come to the table and say, hey, I have this no code solution, and like, check this out. I have my visual experience, and I take this component and I just drag it to the right a little bit, and the whole layout breaks. The whole layout breaks because the guardrails weren't in place. It was fully no code. And it's like, how do you guys solve for this? Well, we have a different approach with guardrails and a design system. Yeah, right. So I think there are pros and cons, and of each solution. But when we're talking specifically around like enterprise mid-market, like I think no code is still a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, it's almost more of like a starter type thing, like
Starter with guardrails. Guardrails, it
Yeah.
adheres to brand, adheres to standards, adheres to accessibility, mobile. There's a lot of kind of nuances where a small to medium-sized business likely won't get fined, but a mid-market enterprise or enterprise will have some fines for not meeting accessibility criteria, or will get penalized on Google for not being mobile, right? And so the risk is higher, and so the guardrails need to be in place. And I think that's kind of where we start to see, okay, no code start to fall apart.
Yeah, and I would imagine no code, when you reach a certain level, becomes a little bit of a black box, in the sense that you can't get into it because it's no code, or you don't, that you're missing the point to get into it, right? Because it's supposed to be provided to you, kind of ready to go.
And remember that I talked about being on site with a customer for 2 days, and they kept talking about reuse. If you have a no code system and someone makes a change to a button or a component or a banner, that banner is not the same as the previous one. It becomes an unique instantiation of that banner. It's not reuse anymore. And then so you have all of these custom components and custom parameters to now maintain. And I have been in scenarios where someone uses no code and everything looks like a green or orange CTA button, and it's like, oh no, there's like 48 different variations of that CTA now. There's 48 React buttons because someone no coded a bunch of buttons, and I'm going to change the padding on this one. I'm going to change the margin. I'm going to make this one slightly wider. And now you have 48 buttons to maintain, and the customer experience is just wonky. So.
That's very true. So we're looking at this new slide here. This feels like a real SEO hedge to put composable and mock together. But I think it's a good point to, after we explain them all together, let's get into the composable mock architecture and kind of the benefits, as we've talked a lot about them, but just we'll kind of corral them here into a couple of points.
I should have got you to put headless on this slide so we hit the SEO trifecta.
In this locked graphic.
Okay, sorry. Well, what's the question?
So let's talk here about kind of the benefits of the composable mock architecture. We've said many of them, but we have a couple here to really hit home. I don't know if you have any. Well, you probably have plenty of real life examples just off the top of your head talking through these points.
So I use the word levers a lot, right? Levers, like or maybe not levers, but generally, there are different audiences that have different KPIs. And so typically talking to an IT team or an engineering team, when I'm talking to a prospect or a customer, they're pretty focused on cost containment. They're pretty focused on improving efficiency, improving agility, improving cycle time. Like, they want to get more software developed faster. And so cost containment becomes a really, really key focus area. And when I'm talking to customers about cost containment and what to measure, it just does generally look at kind of two things. What are your cycle time? So how long does it take you to do like activities from before and after? And then effort hours, right? And so if you start to see improvements in cycle time and improvements in effort, you have now improved your efficiency. You have cost containment. The most beneficial way, or kind of the most obvious way, is is really in that glue code area. And when I'm talking about glue code, and what I'm specifically referring to is code that connects systems to other systems. And so it's kind of like plumbing. You have to do that work in order to move data and content around, but it doesn't actually advance your business goals or objectives and your customer goals and objectives. It's got to be done to set the foundation. So if you can take that very boring plumbing work and push it into a product that takes it out of code and makes it more configuration based, this is a value prop of Uniform, right? This is where Uniform does really well in this cost containment conversation, because you can then minimize the amount of glue code you need to write. So right there, you have cost containment. Big benefit. Now, if you think about the next benefit, you need to add a system or swap a system or add a data feed or swap a data feed. Your options are you go back to your code or you go back to a system. There is also things like GraphQL and super graphs and these type of graphs that can kind of sit in the middle. And there's trade-offs, right? You either have all of this logic and code and facilitation in code in your application. You could have it in queries. So you have code complexity, query complexity, or a vendor. So you need to kind of pick where do you want to spend your money, because all three of them have costs. Vendors can have their license fees. Uniform charges a fee. Your query complexity, you're paying for humans, and you're probably paying for some infrastructure to stand up your supergraph, your GraphQL, graph of GraphQL. Or code complexity, someone's writing that code. So you have developer costs, developer plus license costs, or license costs. And each business kind of needs to weigh the pros and cons and determine which way to go. And there is a tipping point. And this is an argument I make, is when you start to scale, the vendor approach becomes very cost advantageous very fast. But if you're a smaller team, smaller org, you could probably do it all in code. And then there are going to be organizations that are in the middle, and that's fine. So engineering teams, cost containment, but also when you start to think about why you're seeing that cost containment, it is because you're getting more efficient. You've pushed a lot of the glue code effort off. So you start to see time to market advantage. Your features get to market faster. You do have that engineering agility. So that's the improvement for that audience. When we think about composable for content ops and marketing, having the visual tools to drag and drop and take items from a design system and drop it on screen and tape content from different sources and put it on the canvas, you see what I tell digital leaders to measure is how much faster are they able to build like a campaign page, like as a like-to-like exercise. So in a headless CMS or in a DXP or an all-in-one, take your measurement, and then in a composable tool like Uniform Visual Canvas, you have option 2, and what's that delta? And now generally it's faster. Generally it's an order of magnitude faster in option number 2, because you have some things set up to do things in some guardrails, and that is a value prop. Based on that delta, so you're building experiences faster. That's great. Now what? Well, oftentimes organizations talk about that speed to market being really key, but the speed to market also unlocks something else, which is white space in the brains of your digital team. Now they've got their campaign launched, the job's done faster, and now they can actually think about optimizing the experience. Oh, you know what? This content might not be right. Maybe I need to measure this and make tweaks and changes. Maybe I need to create variations based on different regions, locales. Maybe we'll translate in some regions. Maybe we'll change banners. And now you start to have white space to think about the better way of leveraging and creating better content and testing and learning that content to maximize the customer needs, right? So if you have a support page and support articles, you can think about how to make that with that white space, and because you're faster and you're more efficient, you now have time to think. You can think about how to make these support articles better at answering customers' questions, so they don't call the call center. That's very valuable. We can answer someone on this page when they Google something, and they land on this page, and we can answer the query, and we knock a call out of the call center. That's like $12 to $15 saved, right? And it adds up. And so those types of, having white space for content ops and marketing, I think is really key and really important. And then being able to apply those sophisticated needs, applying the translations, optimizing translations. So that's tends to have incremental motion on conversion rate when you start to have that white space to think about optimizing your content. And then the third group is kind of that growth marketing conversion rate optimization team. Those teams, when they have the right tools and they can kind of coalesce the data and the content and everything's come together, then you can really start to amplify what the content ops team is doing with that white space. You can really think about, hey, I have this campaign in market, has a UTM parameter. I want to go from that UTM parameter. If someone clicks on that email or hits that paid media ad and they come to the landing page, we have a banner that's ready to go that matches that experience. So they go from email or banner ad, click through, and the banner is personalized to that UTM parameter. The rest of the page might be, and I've shown this very quickly. Like someone challenged me to create one of these experiences, and I got it done in about 7 minutes. I'm like, okay, here at the top, you have this experience based on this campaign. But then further down the page, it's still showing me the best sellers in Oakville. I'm in Oakville, suburb of Toronto. And so I had a personalized section at the top, which is a banner for this campaign. But then I had some defaults in place that were personalized to my location. And you have this kind of mix and match sophistication. So the next person viewing the page will, through the UTM parameter, through that email, will see the same banner, but they might see best sellers in Boston. Right? And so it's now your experience, my experience, we both entered in the front from the same campaign, but we have different experiences because some are campaign-based, some are location-based. So you start to have these very sophisticated and interesting opportunities. And it's not really a big surprise, but like there are some key ones, like if you localize and translate content to the language that someone wants to engage with, you'll start to see like 20, 30, 40% improvements in conversion rate just on localizing the content. Then when you start to add in things like sophisticated personalization rules, every industry, every business that I've ever worked with or consulted with, there is people that just have been at the business so long that they have these like no-brainers. They know what's going to make people tick and convert because they have so much industry expertise. They have a backlog of all these no-brainers, but they don't have the tools to implement all the no-brainers. But once you start to knock off the no-brainers and you see 3%, 5%, 10%, 14%, 18%, you start to see these incremental improvements in conversion rate. All of a sudden, you've now improved your efficiency and cost, and your revenue starts to look like this, and your digital investments are just so much more impactful. And your customer at the end has this contextual, relevant, anticipatory experience. So they're not complaining. They're happy. It's fast. Right. And that's actually probably the number one driver of composable and mock is Google wants everyone's pages to be lightning fast. And the composable mock tools out of the box are super fast, content delivery network, very modern, lightning experiences. That's where I think the composable and monolith not composable, the all-in-one and monolith solutions are still lagging behind. Like you need to implement a tremendous amount of caching layers to get the similar performance where the composable mock experience is just kick butt on speed and SEO.
I love it. So there's a couple of things in there. First of all, I like the no-brainer bottleneck that gets broken up. I like the white space thing. It makes me think back to on my old hard drive on my computers when I would go defrag. And there would be all those like open spaces that it would fix. And then all of a sudden you'd have all this new space available. And the other piece is because there's many more resources on your team who can create these digital experiences and these tools, it allows a larger team to get things to market quicker because there's more people involved in doing it. And on the flip side, there's something you've told me in the past. We did an article on it for CMS Wire when maybe I was thinking too advanced, saying is low code, no code going to be the end of developers and all that? And you were like, no, you'd be shocked how many developers are still just doing content entry. Yeah. And so that takes them out of that too. So there's like a whole lot of efficiencies and optimizations gained from this.
Yeah, it's almost like a democratization of who is involved in digital experience delivery.
It's
And
a lot of D's.
oh yeah.
Democratic digitization of digital experience.
But it is, you know, like to a certain degree, like our our number one user of uniform at uniform is a product marketer. And you know, 99% of website changes go through our product marketing team. And and that's great because they also have the subject matter expertise and what words and what language and what you know, it's like they know what content makes people tick, and then they're enabled to go make those changes. Fantastic.
Yeah. And I mean, if a developer who doesn't have the context but is only loading it because that they're the only one who can do it, there's a lot of, we talked about the gaining of white space. There's a lot lost in that transition where they're not maybe doing those on the fly fixes. They're just,
Yeah.
pasting it in.
I saw something cool that we're doing on our own site where we're loading in a bunch of data from 6sense so we can identify what company someone is attached to when they arrive at our website. And then based on that data, we can change the experience. Be like, hey, Matt, looks like you're visiting us from Conobos. Are you looking for our partner program? And we can make it so we have this, you know, kind of always on account-based marketing approach because 6sense gives us the data, and then we can without writing any code, we can activate and start feeding in those data feeds and picking up those variables and then dropping it into the banner. So if you've meet the criteria, you see that. And I've had comments from competitors of Uniform being like, man, every time I hit the Uniform page, it's pushing me to the careers page. Like, what's the deal? Like, yep, that's on purpose. Yeah. We have identified your IP range, or 6sense has identified your IP range and told us you belong to a competitor. And yeah, we're going to push. Yeah. You're looking for, why are you on our website? So,
That's pretty funny. All right. We're almost going to take this all the way as we can be long-winded, but that's okay. We're answering many of these. So this is a big one, right? Choosing the right architecture for your business. Now, I have noticed a lot of things coming out of Uniform lately, maybe the last half year, with your position in the market. You can say a lot of things about all of the tools, especially headless CMSs and evaluating your options because you kind of sit at the nexus potentially. Can you talk through, I know you just had an evaluation guide, I think, on RFPs and there was a headless CMS kind of review. Can you talk through this, choosing the right architecture?
Yeah. So the headless CMS, it wasn't just headless; it was all CMS. So you can see like there was like AEM and Sitecore and a few of the others that were not traditional headless CMSs in the CMS guide. So we do find, like, from our position, we are also bridging what would be considered monolith and all in one. We're bridging them into kind of modern architectures, and we have, and I think that's interesting, right? It's like if we can be that bridge, that's great for the end user and customer, but then also like that proves that some of those older tools still have value, right? People are happy using those to create experiences and create content, and they'll feed it in through Uniform to attach it to different systems, and that works. So the CMS guide is agnostic, headless or not headless, and that's good. And then there was an RFP evaluation guide as well. Part of this is, yes, we see and interact and engage with a lot of the tools because we can stitch a lot of them together because we have a bank of connectors. The other part too is like we have tremendous subject matter expertise at the Uniform team. It is just mind blowing. It's like it's like all of these people used to work at other companies and they've kind of coalesced in the Uniform, and it's like this is why we're able to produce this type of content and then have so many opinions and options and scar tissue and experience, because we've collected a pretty strong group of subject matter experts, and that was part of the reason that I joined Uniform. Is, hey, like, Mark Demany is a super smart person. Tim Benix is super smart. Marcelo Lewin is super smart. And like you start to stack, like our founders, Lars, Alex, Adam are all subject matter experts. And you know, they can kind of go deep in any area in our space. And that gives us the ability to provide. And sometimes there's debates of like, are we product led growth? Are we sales led growth? And I've been trying to promote like Sherpa led growth. We are like, and Darren, our president, tremendous amount of subject matter expertise. And he says, yeah, we're the guide. Like that is our position. Like we have a great tool and a great platform, but ultimately we are also a bit of a guide. And we should lean in on our expertise and be those guides, because the market is super confusing, right? And like system integrators and agencies lean on us to be a guidepost, end customers and prospects. So this is kind of an interesting area. Now, if it's like a fully detailed evaluation, we likely won't be executing that. We will say, hey, here's our agency partners. We'll introduce you to a couple, and they'll help you. When it comes to architecture, though, I'm creating a bit of a map, and kind of like a MarTech map specifically for digital experiences and the future of digital experiences, so you can start to understand, here are some standard capabilities. You don't need all of the capabilities at the gate, but you should pick a few that make a lot of sense for your business. So you might need a commerce capability or a content capability, or both with search, and that might be version 1 of your future digital platform. It's just commerce, content, search. Great. Here are the options available, and here are the connections we have. So it's like you can hot swap, and you can do a POC and change. So you have a ton of adaptability out the gate. And there are some that are better than others, but generally they're all pretty good when it comes to scale, performance, content delivery networks. And I talk about like the Black Friday, Cyber Monday test, or like a Super Bowl ad test. For the most part, the modern tools can survive a Super Bowl ad, and that's great, right? Like they have the infrastructure, they have the backing, they're enabled by one of the giant cloud providers, and that's powerful. So you don't have to implement a lot of custom caching. And this was something that I hit many times when I worked in previous consulting engagements, is to get some of the older systems to perform at a Super Bowl ad level required an entire 3 months of work to build a caching layer between what the all-in-one system provides out of the box versus what the customers actually see. And that caching layer becomes an end delivery, because it just wasn't a feature of the all-in-one. It just didn't do it well. So as an agency, we go in and we build that. When we look at the modern tool, it's like Contentful, you don't need to. It's just out of the box. Uniform, you don't need to. We will push to Cloudflare, to Vercel, to Netlify, like whatever infrastructure you have in your kit that's set up for that, right? So you have a tremendous amount of flexibility to meet that scale. And ultimately, yeah, it's understanding the business. What are those levers? And then how can we align the technology to meet those levers? And some businesses are very keen on cost containment, so we focus on solutions for cost containment. Some businesses are very keen on conversion rate and revenue, so we focus our efforts there. So we could probably unpack and spend an hour just here.
Yeah. Well, I think the interesting thing, we always like to say on the Konobo side, that you don't have to go from an all-in-one to all at once.
Yes.
And that is one of the beautiful parts of composability, is we've found success with road mapping engagements, and we right size it. I'm not trying to make a pitch here, but we right size it to the customer, and then actually put our best folks in CX and solution architects, and we put them on the project to actually create kind of a composable roadmap. And it gives you a sense of pricing. It gives you a sense of where you can start based on what you're feeling the most pain. Because that's another great part with it, is that you can start. You can say, let's do one headless commerce instance for this one brand. Let's do a landing or microsite around this headless CMS. It's really open to that. And then you can prove the value because of the time to market. You can prove it quickly, and you can kind of pilot that, right?
So I would make an argument that the first piece of the stack should be uniform. And then as your complexity increases, you have all, because like we do find ourselves in a position where even if you pick a headless CMS or headless commerce system and you add in uniform to support the structure, it takes an entire quarter off the project. The time to market is that much faster. And so now I'm opinionated. I think uniform needs to be one of the first pieces in that transition.
Well, that is perfect. We'll go with that, and we'll work together for anybody who'd like to chat on that roadmap. But Andrew, this was phenomenal, and we will now that we'll come out of the webinar, we can jump into the LinkedIn comments on our after this. because we've gone the full hour, but this was really great. Again, our fourth content piece together. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Always great collaborating with you, Matt. Thank you very much. All right. Adios.